Welcome back, everyone, to another episode here at Catholic Table Talk Podcast. This is the podcast where everything Catholic is on the table. Today's episode is brought to you by Dr. Katrina Wing. Find out how she can help you, your family out at mydoctor.com. Also, have a personal website, mdkatrina.com. Thank you for Dr. Katrina for sponsoring today's show. Also have another sponsor today is Ken Litchfield with his book, How Old Is Your Church? It's only $6 on Amazon. Thank you for Ken Litchfield for sponsoring today's show as well. Today's show, we're going to have a former Protestant pastor on the show and podcast host talking about kind of the conversion to Catholicism. Now, I always am fascinated about stories of former Protestants who become Catholic. I always find it fascinating about the story. I have not had one on yet. Many of you know of Keith Nestor. We have had on the show, but he didn't really talk about his conversion story. So this is basically the first time we're going to talk about a conversion story on here. So really looking forward to that. Also, before we get to that, please don't forget to like, subscribe, share the show with your friends and family, anyone who is even not Catholic who might enjoy the show. Also, go down to the links below to find this week's speaker's contact links and where you can find them, as well as all the platforms. We try to do stuff a little bit different on each platform. So try to follow us and like us on every platform down in the description below. Also, don't forget to get a hold of us at catholictt@gmail.com for show and speaker requests. So, I always love to have fan mail come in. That's one of my favorite things off air that I like to do. So, on to this week's guest. And like I said, he's a former Protestant pastor, now a podcast host himself. Podcast is called Why Catholic? And his name is Justin Hibbard. He spent 39 years in Protestant circles, including Seventh-day Baptist, as well as a few others. Justin served in pastoral ministry for 11 years. Justin recently came home to the Catholic Church, and now, like I said, has a podcast called Why Catholic? Also, he has conversion memoir online at Pilgrimage to Catholic to God, excuse me, pilgrimage to Catholicism. So great website, great podcast, and making his Catholic Table Talk debut is Justin Hibbard. So Justin, thank you again for just really coming on the show today.
Thank you so much, William. Happy to be here.
All right, yeah, and like I said, have not had a former Protestant become Catholic on the show yet, so I'm really looking forward to this show. And again, I really recommend the show to anyone who is non-Catholic as well. Just because I know a lot of people who I interact with who are non-Catholic, and we always have great debates on it. So I guess just starting off the show, Justin, we always hear the question, it's all over online, right? It's like, why be Catholic and not just Christian? But I just want to get your personal take on, why did you become a Catholic and not just remain, a Christian Protestant?
Yeah, it's a great question. So for me, Catholicism is the fullest expression of Christianity. And I'll give you three examples of that. The first is unity. When I was looking for a church and in my kind of story of deconstructing what church is supposed to be and thinking about what is church supposed to be, one of the things I came to is unity. Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane before he was crucified, he prayed that he and that his followers would be one as he and the Father are one. And that's a tall order, right? That's a unity that we've never experienced before. And here I'm looking at all of these like 30,000 something Protestant denominations and these independent churches and everything like that. And I'm thinking to myself, where is that unity that Jesus prayed for? Where is that? And I think we could say like, oh, we are unified in kind of a mystical sense, so to speak, but not really like the way that the Father and the Son are in unity. So one of the questions I was looking for was, is there a church out there that is becoming more unified, that is growing in unity, that supports unity, that really breathes that unity. And the answer is unequivocally the Catholic Church. And there's just not only is it the largest church with something like 1.3 billion people, but when I looked at history and I saw the Eastern churches coming back into communion with the Catholic Church to form the Eastern Catholic churches, when I saw the Anglican and Episcopal churches coming in through the Ordinariate of St. Peter, I thought, man, this is a church that is continuing to be unified. And I struggled with the papacy and the hierarchy of the church. But when I understood that the church fathers, they saw the papacy as this mechanism to help unify the church, it made a lot of sense, because the Catholic Church is able to do things that other churches like the Eastern Orthodox Church can't do, specifically because of its structure. And so it's growing in unity. Say what you want about the Pope and so forth, but we're looking at the fruit of that, and that is that unity. And so for me, one of the reasons why I think Catholicism is the fullest expression is unity. A second is continuity with history. When I look at history and I said, wow, that doesn't look like my evangelical church at all. And I'm reading Justin Martyr, in his description of the Mass in 150, and I think, wow, that's going on today in the Catholic Mass. This is exactly what the Catholic Mass is. And so we see this continuity of history, not just in practices, but also in the apostolic succession that is going on. And we see that the apostles pass down their authority to the next generation of bishops and so on and so forth down the line, but also a continuity of history in what we believe. And so for me, as a Baptist, I look back at the 1600s and said, yeah, that's where things began. And it kind of like leapfrogged all the way to the Bible, biblical times. And I'm looking at history from the apostles to the next generation and so on and so forth until the present time. And the third reason I would give you is the sacraments and the sacramental worldview. When I think about the fullest expression of Christianity, the sacraments are there as a mechanism, as a conduit of God's grace to our souls. And so for me, the Eucharist, confession, confirmation, so on and so forth, those things have become extremely important in my life and healing in my life as well. And so I could not imagine going back to a place that did not have that sacramental worldview, because that's become my everything.
I love the three answers, the three reasons. Just recently, listening to Father Mike Schmitz and Catechism of the Year, he really spoke on the unity. He was like, yeah, we are kind of unified, but not to the degree that God wants us to be. And that's what really the Catholic Church really provides. And I mean, just like you were talking about with church history, I mean, it's like we do the same stuff that the apostles did, like you said, St. John Martyr. Basically, it hasn't really changed too much ever since way in the beginning. I don't know how people really see that or how they tend to overlook that. I don't know how they do that, but it's the same. And I mean, yeah, truthfully, the sacraments. I mean, I just love the sacraments, and I don't think people who are even Catholic, like many Catholics, kind of take the sacraments for granted, and they only see the full purpose, the big purpose of it as well. I would just like to ask you a question, a kind of pop question, if I may, on the sacraments.
Sure.
Just because like a couple Protestant friends of mine don't really think of the sacraments of really like what you thought of them, when you kind of join the Catholic Church. So I guess my question would be like, why the sacraments? What really stood out to you? Why did you believe like they were really truly God in the Eucharist and the Holy Spirit working through the priest and confession, and Jesus as well. So like, I guess, yeah, like why were the sacraments so outstanding to you?
Yeah, great question. So originally, I didn't understand why the Catholic Church had 7 sacraments. Why is marriage a sacrament? I didn't understand all of that stuff. And I understood baptism, I understood communion, but I understood them in a symbolic way. And so for me, and I didn't understand confession. I was like, why go to a priest when you can go right to God, right? That's a classic Protestant line. And so for me, I was working through all of the different Catholic doctrine. And the biggest one for me that stood out was the Eucharist. I was like, man, this is a big hurdle, because I was always taught it was symbolic. I always taught that it was symbolic. And that it becomes the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus. Like, I don't get it. Well, what happened was that I was in a Bible study, a Protestant Bible study, and we were discussing First Samuel, where the Philistines capture the Ark of the Covenant. And some really crazy things happen. Their god Dagon falls prostrate in front of the ark. The next day, his head is cut off, and his hands are cut off. People start getting tumors and everything like that. And someone made the comment and said, "Is the ark God, or is it just a symbol?" And that was an eye-opening moment, because I said, wait, it's not just a symbol. Because symbols don't make people sick. Symbols don't give people tumors. And it was right then that I thought about 1 Corinthians chapter 10, where Paul's talking about, if you eat of the body and drink of the blood without discerning the body and blood of Jesus, you are eating and drinking judgment on yourself. And that was and I was like, wait, it's not just a symbol. It's more than that. And that really opened my eyes to understanding sacraments. And I think for me, one of the things one of my turnoffs of Catholicism was it always looked so stale. It looked so rigid and regimented. And I was much more of like, hey, we've got electric guitars and spotlights and everything like that. And here's the Catholic Church with their robes and everything. And so what I realized when I understood the idea of sacraments and that it's a conduit of God's grace to us, I realized that Catholicism is the wildest expression of Catholicism, not the most boring, but the wildest. And so that was kind of my eye-opening moment to really understand the sacraments as, yes, I'm doing something in participation of faith. I'm taking a step of faith when I participate in the sacraments, but really what's happening is I'm allowing God to move in my life and I'm receiving that grace.
Awesome. Okay. Sounds great. Thank you for that. Sorry I put you on the spot right there, but yeah,
okay.
I mean, basically every time I talk to people, just a family and all, parish community, they became same thing. He was a Protestant pastor, but the Eucharist really caught him, and now they're Catholic, and he's actually becoming the Pope allowed him to and the bishop allowing him to become a Catholic priest. So yeah,
Oh wow, that's awesome.
It's Eucharist is definitely it's not a symbol, that's for sure. So I guess I got a couple other questions. I think we'll kind of move on and we'll come back to them. So I guess we'll probably touch on quite a bit, maybe of your conversion to Catholicism, but just kind of give us a rundown story of other things that happened while you becoming Catholic.
Yeah, so I'll try to keep this as short as possible. So I grew up in a Protestant Christian home. You mentioned Seventh-day Baptist. That was my community. Not Seventh-day Adventist, Seventh-day Baptist. I grew up in a very devout home. My parents are very devout Christians. We went to church every week, and I also went to Christian schools my entire life. And I say that because I didn't know anything about Catholicism. All I knew was what people told me about it. And they had lots to say about it. Like Catholics aren't Christians. They believe in a works-based salvation. They worship Mary. They worship idols, all of the caricatures that you hear. And so what happened was I ended up building up this wall that whenever I thought about Catholicism, it was this distant thing. It wasn't truly Christian. It was something else. And so there was this wall here, and God slowly kind of started taking bricks away from that wall. So a big part of it was, I studied abroad in Spain, and this was my first time in a non-Christian school. And I didn't really know what to do with myself. I was so used to having like-minded believers around me. And so this was also during 9/11, and I was scared. I didn't know what to expect. And so I said, I want to go find a place to pray. And, I didn't know anything about Catholic churches. I didn't know you could just walk in and pray right there. And so I found the biggest one. I found the cathedral, which was just down the street from my school. It's the third largest cathedral in the world in Sevilla. And so I would ask the guard, can I go in and pray and not pay admission? And he would let me do that. And I would go in at times and pray. And I had a classmate, and she was Catholic, and she said, hey, I go to mass on Sunday nights. Would you like to join me? And so I started going to mass. I didn't know any of the things to say or any of the rituals, and they're doing this for the gospel, and I'm like, like I didn't really know what I was doing, and I'm kind of mumbling along, kind of making up my own Spanish as we're going. I'd go up and receive communion because I didn't know it was the body and blood and soul and divinity of Jesus. I didn't truly understand those differences. Well, when I finished my semester abroad, I came back to school, to my Protestant school, and I said, well, maybe I'll continue being Catholic, and I attended mass in Western New York for one Sunday. And then I was like, that I'm really in this Protestant circle. I was just surrounded by Protestants. And so it just seemed to be this kind of short-lived thing for Spain. Well, right after college, I went right into pastoral ministry, and that's where I was. I was bivocational, so I was part-time pastor while I was working other jobs. And I got into apologetics. I really loved apologetics. I loved arguing my beliefs and standing up for my beliefs and really looking at it from this logical, theological standpoint. And I also would argue against Catholicism quite a bit as I got to know more and more about it. Now, I had a couple of Catholic friends. One is my good friend Martin, who was Catholic, and we'd have these great conversations while we're playing golf, and he would help me to understand Catholicism, and I'd ask him questions. And of course, I'm trying to convert him over to being Protestant. And then there was another guy, another friend of mine, who was studying to be a Dominican priest. So his name was Brother Ezra. It's now Father Ezra. And he would share the Catholic perspective as well. And he was a Catholic convert. And so, I got to meet these guys, and I really got to understand, I got to go past the caricatures of Catholicism. Sure. Now, I ended up leaving another thing that happened was that I was working. So while I was a part-time pastor, I was working at a Catholic school, and I did that for 5 years. And, I was so arrogant. Like I would come into there, and I was thinking to myself, like, they don't know all the truth. I know the truth, and all of this stuff. And I didn't understand where they were coming from in a lot of their conversations and discussions. I had this perception that Catholics were just religious in practice and not really reformed in their nature. And so there were some teachers that would participate in communion and just say the worst things or do the worst things. And I was like, and that just kind of led to that stereotype, right? And but then I would meet people that were genuine good people that loved the Lord, that exhibited this Christ-likeness. And again, that was just another block taken off that wall. And then there was one moment I'll never forget. I would go to mass at times. Anytime we had a faculty, like a professional development faculty time, there was always a mass, and our chaplain would come and he would say it, and he would lead the mass. And whenever communion happened, I always stayed at my seat, and I made people kind of like get over me, to get to communion. I didn't kind of go in the line and cross myself. So one time, just because of logistics, I decided to do that, just because the area was so tight. And I walked up there, and I'm thinking to myself, oh, here we go, and I crossed myself, and Father Ryan, the chaplain, said just the most beautiful blessing over me. And he'd probably seen me skip communion over and over and over again. And here he was just being a conduit of God's grace and mercy. And that really broke down some walls. And every time we had mass after that, I was like, I'm going up to get a blessing. I really want this blessing.
Right.
And again, just walls being taken down. So all that to say, I ended up leaving pastoral ministry because it was just so much. I had 3 little kids, I had a full-time job and a part-time pastoring, that it was just too much. So ended up leaving pastoral ministry. And this was the first time in my life where I had an option of which church to go to, where I was like, okay, well, which church do we go to now? And what do we do? And so we went to a couple of different churches. I went to a Mennonite church. We went to a Presbyterian church for a little while. And there was something that happened. It was the 500th anniversary of the Protestant Reformation. And I was at this Presbyterian church, and it was like celebratory. And the prayers were like, thank you, God, for Martin Luther. Thank you that he stood up against the Catholic Church. Thank you. And it felt like, I was like, I feel like I'm celebrating a divorce. And I thought back to that unity, and I was like, what would Jesus think about this? It didn't sit well with me. And it really began a time where I didn't even realize it at the time, but I was really deconstructing what the Christian church was supposed to be. Moved out to Utah. We attended an evangelical church out here. And again, I just kept wrestling with, is church really just a few songs and a sermon? When COVID happened and everyone was just, okay, let's turn the camera around. And now this is church, me speaking at you. I was like, something is really missing here. So, funny story. When I was I'm living out here in Utah, and we would go skiing and in Park City, and we would pass by this beautiful Catholic church called St. Mary's. And I joked with my wife one day. I said, I would be Catholic just to go there. It's this beautiful church nestled in the mountains. And well, anyways, long story short is that one night I just got on a YouTube rabbit hole where I'm going down these little rabbit holes of Catholic videos and trying to watch some things. And then I was like, oh yeah, let me check out that St. Mary's church. And then I discovered that the pastor there put these videos on where he's giving these little short 3-minute devotionals, or he's singing a song in Latin. And I was just fascinated by it and just kept drawing me in. And I said, there was this point where I was getting a little bit more serious, and I thought, what I really need is I need Protestants or former Protestants who can explain Catholicism to me, because I have what I think is my understanding of Catholicism. But every time I talk to Catholics, I feel like they're talking here and I'm talking here, and I really need someone to bridge that gap. And so I stumbled on this podcast called On the Journey with Matt and Ken. And it's from the Coming Home Network. I didn't know anything about the Coming Home Network, anything like that. And so I'm listening to them, and Matt Swain, he's a former Wesleyan, and Ken Hensley, the other co-host, is a former Baptist pastor. And I was like, this is perfect. I went to a Wesleyan college. I'm a former Baptist pastor. This is perfect. And so they were able to explain Catholicism in a way I just found to be so helpful. And I listened to, every episode that came out, I would listen to it, and I'm like, oh, okay, I get this. And I'm kind of going through the different hurdles and overcoming some of these doctrinal differences, and really trying to understand how does Catholicism fit with what I believed, or how is it different? And I just found myself drawing more and more to it. And of course, at this time, I'm getting really scared, because I'm thinking to myself, man, at some point, like, what if I keep going down this path and I end up becoming Catholic, or want to become Catholic? What are people going to think of me? And I was terrified. I told my wife, I'd kind of make these little hints like, oh, I'm kind of studying Catholicism, but I was just terrified to tell anyone about what I was doing. And so ultimately, my wife and I are having a little bit more conversation, and I got to a point where I said, there's only so much studying I can do. I really need to see this from the inside. And so wintertime of, I guess it was 2021, I said to my wife, hey, what do you think about attending a Catholic church? Now, at the time, we had stopped going to church because she was an ER nurse, and our church was not really taking any precautions for COVID. And so, we, that gave me the time and space to really kind of explore Catholicism without the other pressures that I was having. It's kind of like, stepping out into Spain, and not having that Protestant social pressure, to really explore Catholicism. And so, one of the things that we discovered with the Catholic Church is that they were wearing masks. They distanced themselves every other pew. There was reservations. We were just really blessed by that, because we never know when my wife was going to bring COVID home. We certainly didn't want to affect her, because that would mean that she's not there at the hospital saving lives. So that really spoke to us, and we started attending. On the first Sunday of Lent, and just continued throughout that process. My wife and I had a conversation around Easter time, and I said, I think I really want to become Catholic. And she said, she was at a different place, and I understood. And I met with our deacon and his wife to talk about what's this process look like, and ask questions. They invited our family to come to RCIA together. And so we did that. And then in the Easter Vigil in 2022, myself and my 3 kids, we all joined the Catholic Church. My oldest 2 were baptized. I was baptized, obviously. So the 3 of us were baptized. So we were confirmed and had first Eucharist. And then my son, who wasn't baptized, he was baptized, confirmed, had first Eucharist. So that is the story. And that was at the same church that I had driven by and said, man, I would be Catholic just to go to that church. Who would have known?
Oh yeah, the Lord works in mysterious ways, that is for sure. I mean, just like for me with the podcast, it's like I always like radio, like podcasts, but I'll probably never do it. And then here I am doing it, and many other people probably have thought the same thing. Like, Catholic churches are pretty beautiful, but I mean, I'm Protestant, I'm not Catholic, and I'm gonna become Catholic, and they're going there. So, yeah, awesome. Great story, Justin. Thank you for sharing that with us. Just because I mean, again, I feel I really have the sense that, I mean, I know of people who basically, that sounds familiar with, like, that's what they believe, that's what they think, that's what happens in their life. So thank you for sharing that with that, because I feel that's really relatable to a lot of people. So yeah. So I guess just kind of wrapping up the show here. Just a couple of quick questions. So your wife has not converted to Catholicism yet, correct?
Correct.
Awesome. Okay. And would you, like I said earlier, my friend's dad is becoming a Catholic priest. Have you thought about that? If they offered it to you, if they said, "Hey, I think that would be good," would you take the opportunity, or?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I'll never say no. I'll never do something, because I've learned that
What?
God will often make you do that very thing, right? Like, I would never say, if God can make me Catholic, the guy who said I would never in a million years become Catholic, who knows what he'd do. So, at this point, I'm really discerning what the Lord will have for me, and where He wants me to serve. I've helped out in the church in various ways. I taught at one of our summits. I've taught a couple of RCIA classes. The podcast is really what I'm focusing on now, and
Sure.
I've led some of the music and played in with the music team there. So we'll see what the Lord has for me. So, but I'll never say I'll never do something. That's for sure.
Yeah, well, that's a great attitude to have. That's really what the Lord wants. So great. Um, so yeah, and basically just going back to the church, like you said, St. Mary's, how beautiful it is. And now, I mean, I don't have mountains that are parishes here, but I mean, basically that back in episode 8 and 9 was basically top 10 reasons why I won't leave the Catholic faith, and basically the church is on my top 10 because they are so beautiful, and it's really just a blessing, just an honor, just to go there and just to worship God in that sacred place. It's truly It's truly incredible. Um, so just wrapping up the show here, Justin. Where can people find Why Catholic and how often do you produce the show?
Yeah, so you can find Why Catholic wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for Why Catholic. You can also go right to the website. It's whycatholic.substack.com, and you can sign up and receive the next episode in your email inbox. And I produce an episode at least once a week. Sometimes we'll have like specials where I'm doing like a feast day or a saint day, and we'll do something there. So and really this podcast is for the Catholic who has been Catholic their whole life and wants to learn more about what they believe. It's for the Catholic curious. It's also for the anti-Catholic, to the person that's like, I'm really opposed to Catholicism, but I'm open to understanding Catholicism from a Catholic point of view instead of like hearing, because there's a lot of Protestants that want to talk about Catholicism, but don't really know or haven't really experienced it. And so that I have a heart for all three of those groups. And so that's what this podcast is all about. Short episodes, about 17 minutes or less.
Awesome. Yeah. That's what I like. So short and sweet. Awesome. So yeah, I'll have the links down below in the description box and all of our platforms you can go and click on, take you right to them. Justin, again, thank you for just getting back to me and like I said, finally getting on the show, and thank you for answering God's call and through the process and what you're doing right now. Well, thank you for coming on the show and hope to have you back on the show sometime.
Thanks so much, William. It's a pleasure.
All right, that's everyone. That's Justin Hibbard from undisclosed location, I guess I can say. So go check out his podcast, Why Catholic, and he has his conversion story there as well. And like I said, go subscribe to his podcast. So and share this with a Protestant friend because, like I said, I feel like this is really relatable to a lot of people out there. So that would do it for this week, folks. Thank you for continuing supporting the show. I really appreciate that. See you next week, God willing, same time, same place on Catholic Table Talk Podcast. We have another great topic because it's where everything Catholic is on the table.